Hello. I just want to go over our Unit 1 notes. This is part 1 for the notes, and please remember you are not turning anything in until we are at the end of the unit of notes, which will be the second video. So hang on to everything that you do today, and then come back to it when we do the next set of notes, and then we're going to turn everything in. So what we're looking at first is going to be our learning targets, which look like this. It's in Google Classroom. Everybody should have seen this as I went over it in class at the beginning of the unit last week or the week before, depending on when you're watching this. And what we're going to be looking at today with our notes is really only just learning target A, and that one is explain factors that affect carrying capacity of ecosystems at different scales. And we're specifically going to look at abiotic and biotic factors, and we're going to look at carrying capacity. After this first set, we're going to kind of finish that up in our next set of notes. We'll start that next set with a few more factors, but then we're moving on to the other learning targets. So the first half here is we're going to do Earth spheres, and then abiotic and biotic factors, and carrying capacity. Okay? So that's where we are as far as learning targets go. And let's see, we have our notes packet is like right there, right here. I would recommend you print it out and write it on it. I would definitely do double-sided because I believe it is 10 pages. And so you want to save paper if you can, and just do double-sided. And that's probably the fastest, easiest way to follow along with the notes. If you aren't able to do that, we're just going to type directly into the Google Doc, or you can write everything out by hand. Either which way is fine with me. And remember to hang on to it and turn it in when we get to the end of the unit. The other thing that you need to do is make notations in the margins over questions you have, or clarifications you would like, or anything, comments that you want to make about stuff, so that we can address that in class after we are finished with the lecture. So please make sure you're doing that. Also pause the video as you need and get everything done that you need to do to get through the notes and understand everything. This obviously goes much quicker than if we were in the classroom, but should be just as much good information for you. Okay? Alright, so let's start with the notes first. And our Unit 1 notes. So our unit is ecosystem interactions and energy. And the first thing we're going to do is Earth's systems interact. Now we have already watched the video that's attached here, so I'm not going to show it again. I think this is useful for going over what the different spheres are, and if you're having any troubles with it, definitely come back and watch it. I think I provided the link already in Google Classroom as well. Alright, so let's define a system. Systems are a network of energy flows and cycling of matter between their components. So, for example, you have matter and energy flowing from one sphere to another. And in our projects, we didn't look at the flow of energy or matter. We just said how that sphere was impacted. Typically, those impacts are either in the form of energy transfer or matter transferring and cycling through. So, for example, you have atmosphere and biosphere interacting. One of the easiest ways to think about this interaction is photosynthesis and respiration. Animal or plants breathe in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and release oxygen, which then goes back into the atmosphere, which then humans can then breathe in, and then we release carbon dioxide through respiration, and all animals basically. So that would be an example of atmosphere to biosphere interaction. An example of hydrosphere to biosphere, very simple, would be drinking a glass of water. That would definitely be an interaction, a flow of energy and transfer of matter. Fish, also swimming through the ocean and lakes, would be another interaction. So that's a couple of different interactions that you've got right off the bat. So in the notes here, we're going to talk about the 4 spheres of Earth. And in our projects, we also added the 5th sphere, which is a sub-sphere of biosphere, and that was Anthrosphere. And that one is not part of the main 4 ones, but is definitely has a huge impact on all the other spheres. So matter on Earth is going to be either solid, liquid, gas, or plasma. That's it. It can't be anything else. And then it's found in the 4 different spheres in those various forms. So we have the atmosphere, we have a hydrosphere, we have biosphere, and we have geosphere. Each of the spheres has an explanation here. I'm not going to go over that because we're going to go over it in the next slide. So moving on to atmosphere. The atmosphere is composed of all the gases that surround the Earth's surface. And on the side here, you do not have to know the layers of the atmosphere, but you can read what they are. The closest one to the Earth's crust is the troposphere, followed by the stratosphere, and then the mesosphere, and thermosphere, and then exosphere. I can't read, it's so tiny. But you're not going to be asked to regurgitate that. What you will be asked to regurgitate is telling me how much of our air is nitrogen, what percent is oxygen, and what percent is everything else. And on here you can see it's 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% everything else. And that 1% is a really small amount, but look at how catastrophic increasing the carbon dioxide has been to our living conditions, basically. The fires that we have raging, droughts, all of that, extra strong hurricanes, can all be attributed to that very small percentage of our atmosphere. So yeah, we'll talk more about that as we get further into climate change stuff. The reason the atmosphere is so important is it protects the surface of the Earth from some of the sun's harmful radiation, so your UV radiation, the things that cause skin cancer, which is perfectly on display of why you should wear sunscreen, so you don't wind up with a face like mine, which isn't bad right now because it's only day 1. But you'll see as it progresses. Wear your sunscreen because our atmosphere is not blocking all the UV radiation. The atmosphere also keeps us warm. If we did not have our atmosphere, we would be cold. It wouldn't be suitable for life. So the atmosphere is definitely what keeps us in our planet and alive and thriving. Okay, hydrosphere is next. This is Earth's water in all of its forms, solid, liquid, and gas, which means you have hydrosphere found in all of the other spheres. So we have gas in water vapor in clouds in our atmosphere. We have groundwater underneath the Earth's crust in our geosphere. We also have it in our, oh my goodness, drawing a complete blank, atmosphere, hydrosphere, geosphere, and biosphere. Obviously, people, animals are made up largely of water, so there's water in us as well. And most of Earth's water is actually salt water. 97% of it is. There is about 3% that's freshwater, which most of it is trapped in the glaciers at this point. We don't actually have that much available to us to drink. Some other examples of hydrosphere, we have oceans, lakes, rivers, groundwater, glaciers, ice sheets, and water vapor in the clouds. Make sure you have water vapor down because that is definitely a very easy quiz question because people forget about clouds all the time. Okay, geosphere. This is mostly solid part of Earth. The lithosphere is the upper solid part. So right up here where the crust is, that's your lithosphere. And that includes rock and soil on Earth's surface, including the seafloor, okay? The geosphere also includes the solid and molten, which is your liquid interior. So you have, it alternates from liquid to solid on all the way down. The inner core is solid, the outer core is semi-liquid, and then the mantle is mostly solid. It's still malleable, it's molten, but it's mostly solid, okay? There we go. That's geosphere. Moving on. Biosphere. This is all forms of life in the geosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere. The biosphere extends into everything, just like the hydrosphere does, so does biosphere. It extends from the deepest parts of the oceans up to the atmosphere. And how you know that is we have like thermal vents down at the bottoms of the oceans, and there's chemophiles that thrive on the chemicals. They're little tiny microscopic organisms that survive on that way. They don't survive with water or with sunlight or with oxygen, but they use the chemicals that the vents produce and survive there. So all the way down at the bottom of the ocean to birds in the atmosphere. And they fly very high, thousands of feet up, into the atmosphere. So you've got a lot of a variety of depths that you can find biosphere. And here's where we added the Anthrosphere into the subsphere of the Biosphere. It is referring to the part of the environment that is made or modified by humans and is used for human activity. Okay? So cities would be a good example of Anthrosphere. Alright, so we're going to identify the different spheres for each image. I want you to pause the video, and I believe in your notes packet it has a spot for you to do that. Just double checking. Identify as many spheres. Yes, so on the line there, identify as many spheres as you can. Okay? And then hopefully you've paused it and you're coming back and you'll see that in this one we have Hydrosphere in the water, Biosphere with the turtle, and rocks are Geosphere. There's air bubbles as well, so we have atmosphere as well. We do also have ground that the trees are growing on in this one, so we have Geosphere and Biosphere, and the atmosphere is where the smoke is going into. And then I don't see water, so I don't see Hydrosphere in here because it's smoke. So there's no rivers or creeks, so it's just those three. This one here, we have a meadow and a lake. So we have atmosphere, we have Hydrosphere, we have Biosphere, and then we can presume there's Geosphere underneath that growing. So we have all four spheres here as well. The sea otter in the kelp forest, we have Hydrosphere in the ocean, we have Biosphere with the sea otter and the kelp, and we have atmosphere in the air bubbles in the ocean because there is trapped gases. They might be tiny little air bubbles, but they're there. We do not have any geosphere, okay? Here we have a glacier, so that's Hydrosphere on rock, which is Geosphere. And we also have air, so we have atmosphere. And I'm not sure, I'm going to call this moss, so we're going to call that Biosphere as well. So there's all four spheres in this one. And then our desert picture, which is kind of hard to see with my face on it, sorry. We have atmosphere, biosphere in the cactus, we have geosphere in the ground and the rocks, and we have hydrosphere if you think about it. I guess you could make an argument for the other one as well, but inside the cactus, cacti hold water, lots of water, so we know there's hydrosphere in there. So sometimes you can't necessarily see it, but it's still there. Alright, ecosystem interactions and energy. Okay, ecosystems include biotic and abiotic factors. Biotic factors are the living things such as plants, animals, and fungi and bacteria, whereas abiotic factors are non-living things like soil, water, temperature, and light. So we have our living biotic factors here, and then we have our water and rocks here, and underneath my face is a mushroom, which is also a biotic factor. It's a fungi. Okay? Identify 3 biotic and abiotic factors from the image below. Go ahead and pause the video and do that. Okay. Ecosystems include communities. A community is an interacting group of various species in the same geographical area at the same time. So, for example, you might have a forest of trees. That forest is not just trees by itself. It has birds, it has insects, it has snakes, it has mountain lions, you name it, it's got it. So that would be your community in that area. So if you look at a park, it's got a national park. Let's say Yosemite has all of those things. That's its own community. Okay? Found a very interesting image up here of the ocean kelp forest with sea otters. This is a healthy ecosystem. And where the sea otters are no longer there, it is an unhealthy ecosystem. Most of the kelp is gone. So kelp serve a purpose that maybe we don't fully understand yet what their purpose is, but definitely vital to ocean health. All right. Populations are groups of organisms from the same species living together in the same geographical area at the same time. So, for example, we have a grove of trees here, all the same tree. That would be a population. It's in a small little area. They're all the same. Okay? If you find a rattlesnake den, that would be your population of rattlesnakes. I would not recommend finding a rattlesnake den. No, I do not like snakes. No, no, no. Leave the snakes alone. Don't go hunting for them. And underneath my face, we have a bark beetle colony here. Okay, that would also be a population. So you have populations, multiple populations making up your communities. So it goes from a single organism to a population of an organism to a community, which is groups of populations, all in the same area for an ecosystem. And that will be both living and non-living things like streams, soil, etc., making up your ecosystem. So your individual organism, your population of one type of organism, growing out to a more complex community with many populations living in the same area. So it's very simple, and it gets more and more complicated. All right, so how's an ecosystem structured? Each community has several different populations. Each organism in a community has a habitat which provides its food and shelter. If it does not provide food and shelter, it is no longer a suitable habitat and organisms must move. For example, we have squirrels living in a hollow tree trunk. That means that those squirrels are living in there, it's their shelter, and there's probably, if there's a tree, there's probably other trees, and there's probably acorns or something around that the squirrel's going out, collecting and bringing and storing for winter. Okay? So, how is it structured? Each organism in a community has a role or a job called a niche. A niche contains everything an organism needs or does. So, for example, we have this lovely woodpecker right here, and woodpeckers live in the forest. Its niche is to control insect populations that harm trees. So as long as they're in the forest and they're doing their job, they're getting rid of the bark beetles, they're getting rid of worms, they're getting rid of termites. They're great. We love woodpeckers. We have a problem with woodpeckers when they come into our neighborhoods and start doing it to our houses, which I have seen. We have one that is attacking a house down the way from us. We have some woodpeckers in our neighborhood. Not so good. It also attacked our church when about maybe 5 or 6 years ago it was attacking the bell tower of it. So that was pretty interesting to watch that. All right. Population growth. We have two types of growth. We have exponential and logistic. All of us, first of all, before I continue, you need to be able to identify each graph and explain what it represents. That is definitely learning target A, level 2. If you can identify it, that is where you need to be, okay? And then identifying where the carrying capacity is. You don't have an identifiable carrying capacity in exponential. It hasn't reached it yet. It's on a logistic growth curve where it's got that S shape, you'll have your carrying capacity above that S shape. It means the population can't exceed that threshold, okay? Exponential is kind of like with the coronavirus when we were talking about, if you guys saw the graphs for on the news with the surge, and they were predicting, like, and it actually followed it very nicely, especially in New York. The number of cases grew and grew and grew exponentially, and then it leveled off. So we reached a carrying capacity at that time, and then it dipped down, and then hopefully we don't surge back up again, but that's kind of what we're waiting on right now, is to see how it's going to behave in the fall. But this is definitely something you're going to want to know the difference of. An exponential is a population explosion, basically. All right, so exponential growth is a population size that continues to increase indefinitely. A logistic growth is a population size reaches a maximum and then stays relatively stable. It doesn't decrease like the coronavirus one did. It just kind of stays status quo. Okay, doesn't increase, doesn't decrease. It might do little bits of ups and downs, but it'll stay in a relative stable line. So there are limits to population growth. For instance, we have primary productivity of an ecosystem can be reduced by limiting, pardon the dogs. Limiting factors can determine a population's carrying capacity as well. And some of those limiting factors are going to be density dependent and density independent, which we'll talk about. So let's define carrying capacity first before we stop for today. Carrying capacity is the maximum population size of a species that the environment can sustain indefinitely given the available food, habitat, water, and other necessary resources. So it won't be able to sustain a population past that. Okay, I'm going to stop there and we'll pick it up on the next video with slide 22, limiting factors. Okay, thanks guys.